Everybody, it's Jake Trent back here again with another video. What I want to do today is a request from somebody. I got an email from a young man by the name of Thomas and his dad. Thomas is 8 years old and he's been going with his dad out doing some of this stuff, and they have been learning this process together of wilderness skills. And so Thomas really wanted to ask me to do a video on fatwood, how he can find fatwood and how to light it and all that stuff. So I figured that I would do that today. So this is going to be a fairly basic video as far as fatwood goes. Most people know how to find fatwood if you've been in this for a while and know what to look for. But for those of you who don't, this video is for you. So number one, what is fatwood? Fatwood is the wood in a pine tree that has been impregnated in resin, okay? And it's highly flammable, and it goes up and it burns like a candle, and it burns really hot and for a long time. So what I have behind me here is a red pine. Really, one of the best pines to get fatwood from is red pine. White pine will work, but doesn't have near as high of a resin content as red pine does. So how do you tell the difference between white pine and red pine? It's pretty simple. I'm going to pull off one of these clusters here. So if you're looking at this, you can see all these little clusters that are attached to the stem. If you pull off one of those clusters right at the base, you can see there are 2 needles to that cluster. Now on a red pine like this one, there will be 2 needles to a cluster whenever you pull them off. Obviously the needles stay on all year long. On a white pine, there are 5 needles to a cluster. So think of 5 letters in the word white, 5 needles to a cluster. Another thing you can look at to tell the difference between a white pine and a red pine is, number one, the bark. A white pine is going to have a fairly smooth bark compared to a red pine that's going to have a rough bark. Also, what you can look at is how the branches are laid out. On a white pine, you'll have a section of the tree that is branches, then it'll go up, and it'll just be completely bare until it goes up to the next section, and it branches all the way around. So it's very organized as far as branches go. So you'll have that spacing in between each branch cluster, I guess you could say, around the trunk. With red pine, you don't have that. Red pine's all over the place. And this red pine right here is dying. There's a few of them back here behind me. There's not a whole lot of them alive on this property anymore. But back in here, there are tons and tons of down red pine, which is what you're looking for. You can cut fatwood from a live tree. It doesn't work near as well as it does from a dead tree. And you can tell a dead pine whenever it's laying on the ground, or a red pine, because it's got branches coming up everywhere. I'm gonna go ahead and walk back in here in the woods with you, and we'll go ahead and look at some red pine that's down. So this right here is a perfect example of a down red pine. There's about 50 of them back behind me that you guys can't see. But as this tree rots away, you can see the areas that are, rotting, and it's just falling apart basically. You can also see the branch areas. Now, the last thing to rot away on a dead pine tree is the areas where the fatwood is, because the wood is a lot more dense with that resin. That makes the breaking down process a lot slower. So you see all these branches right here. There's a huge one right here that I know I can get a big piece of fatwood out of. So Thomas is using a Swiss Army knife for all of his tasks. So he asked me if I could use a Swiss Army knife and show people how to use a Swiss Army knife in order to collect and light fatwood. So I'm going to do that. Okay, so we've got our Swiss Army knife. This is the Outrider edition, so it has a saw. And what we're going to do is we're going to cut this flush with the tree. Okay. Now, whenever you go to collect something like this fatwood is only going to be about 4 or 5 inches up into this pocket right here, and then that's about all you're going to be able to get out of it. So we'll go ahead and start cutting this. A couple things to look for whenever you're cutting this is, number one, how dark is the wood that's coming out. You can see all of this sawdust that's coming out is a very dark orange, which is what you're looking for. Where gravity collects into these pockets, where the branch goes into the tree, that's where all the resin is going to be held. In a dead tree or a live tree, in a dead tree, you can also find the resin in the roots or the stump sometimes. You break that off, and you can see how dark this resin is in this wood. And if you smell it, it's going to smell just like turpentine or pine sol. But that real dark amber orange color is really what you're looking for. This is going to be highly flammable. If you look at the junction where the branch goes into the tree, this is where the most sap has collected. Now, there's another big piece down here that I'm able to just pull off just like that, because you can see how this right here is the main part of the tree and it's been rotting. And you should be able to just tear that stuff right off. And this right here, this is heavy. This is a heavy piece of wood, and this is going to be a really dense piece of fat wood. So if I take my knife just to check and see, and I just kind of carve down into it, you can see that real dark resin right there. That right there is a good big piece of fat wood. So I've just got you guys sitting on a stump right here. That way it makes filming a little bit easier. So whenever you get a piece like this, if you're just using a Swiss Army knife, there are a few different techniques you can use to split this in half if you want to. Now, I would never tell someone to baton with a tool like this, but if they had to, really the best way to do it, this has a locking blade on it. The best way to do it is to not lock the blade, but just leave it sideways, set it over top just like that. That way you are not stressing any of the pieces or parts that hold that blade in place. But we're not going to do that today. So first thing I'm going to do is grab my saw blade. Now, I could either saw into this to create dust sideways just like that. I can just kind of pinch the saw with my fingers right here and basically just go start scraping down to create the dust just like that, which is probably what I'm going to go with. But you can also, for safety reasons, if you're worried about that saw blade slicing you, you can kind of bury that saw a little bit into a piece of wood and just hold your knife there, tilt it back a little bit, and just make shavings just like that using the back of your saw blade. It's like that. You can see some of the shavings we have. So I'm going to start shaving this down, get a nice little pile, and then we'll talk about lighting it. See how sticky this stuff is? It's just sticking right to my blade. Get some pieces that drop down here to the bottom. You can see how dark orange that wood is, which is what you're looking for. Something like that. You can see the back of that saw blade is just tearing that stuff up. Okay, so we've got a pretty good little pile here. And we'll just go with that. Now, something else you can do to prolong the life of your flame once you get it lit is basically cut slivers off of this to make the flame last a little bit longer. I'm not going to do that today for today's demonstration. That's pretty self-explanatory. So, what you're going to want to do if you want to start this with a ferro rod is I have a necklace here that I keep all my fire starting tools on. I've got a lighter, a ferro rod, and a striker. So Thomas, if you have a ferro rod with a striker, that's going to really be your best option. Now again, you can use the saw blade of your Swiss Army knife. You just have to be careful that whenever you go to strike it, it does not close in on you. So we're just going to use the striker. So there are a few different techniques whenever you're using a ferrocerium rod, and I've talked about them before on this channel. You can either hold your knife or your striker, whatever you have down, and then basically pull the rod back, right? Now, for this demonstration, this is really going to work well for people who can't quite get the strength to do that, like women or kids. So this method is going to work really well for them. But I'm just going to set the ferro rod down here in this material. I'm not going to sit here and pump this back and forth because it's wasting material from the rod. What you want to do is you just kind of want to get a nice firm grip on it, and then maybe do 1 or 2 little pumps. Almost got it. Just like that. That's all you've got to do. Then you have fat wood that's on fire. And the smoke that's coming off of this wood is a very dark black smoke. That's just from the high resin content in this wood. So you can see these 2 items right here can get you fire no problem, along with a ferrocerium rod or a lighter. And this burns for a really long time. It burns nice and hot. That little tiny bit we have, that silver dollar size, you can see it's still burning. And if we were to basically throw this whole stick into the fire, it would probably burn for 30 minutes. Well, Thomas, I hope that helped you out a little bit there, old buddy. That is the basics of finding fat wood and lighting it with a Swiss Army knife. You want to look for fat wood from the branches that are coming from the trunk in those pockets, also the roots of the dead pine and or the stump of the dead pine. So thank you guys for joining me for this video. I'm Jake Trent with Buckeye Bushcraft. If you like any of the gear I use in my videos, you can check out the 2 links below. One is to my Campcraft Outfitters affiliate link. The other one is to my website, buckeyebushcraft.com. So if you're interested in gear or any type of training courses, you can just click those links below if you're interested. I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching.